Ahsoka, Balance of Truth, Book 1, Chapter 34. Make that tertiary, quaternary, and quinary, Bev said to the whole command deck. Signal sequence is unchanged, however, frequency has increased to 60-second intervals. Side was bewildered, unable to locate the source of the secondary signal they had moved to intercept on the small moon. 7, he ordered. Sir, we are still looking deep within the sequence for patterns, but appears to be random, and nothing more than that. Had these been here the whole time, he questioned himself, brought only to their knowledge by the gravity of their methods to stifle any possible means of resistance? Approximate locations, Bev, he said, and he heard her tapping the keys at her terminal. Visual, Captain, she said. Side turned his attention to the hollow image that had remained unchanged after his last order and watched as tiny yellow dots appeared at 5 seemingly random locations around the planet. No, this is intentional, deliberate and happening in real time, he concluded his thought. 7, something must be distributing these sources more broadly to the whole deck, he continued. I want a breakdown of implications, anything known, hypothetical, or even wild fantasy. Your assumption has merit, Captain. Bruchal has measured wake disturbance and blue shift. There is indeed a vessel, but it is eluding all measures of trace capabilities, came the delayed modulated voice. Side stared at the proximity of the 4th dot that resided in relation to his deployed fleet. I need Semper too, he said aloud. Captain Sullen, sir, Bev said, appreciating her diligence. Captain, I want a squad of fighters to investigate that quaternary signal. We need to find out from what it is sourcing, Side said. Understood, sir. Major Willock will have the comm, the captain said eagerly. Clearly ready for any engagement, thought Side. Bev, I want that channel open, he said. Copy, sir. A few moments passed, creating a thick tension that Side had been trying in vain to prevent, before the wavering voice of the squadron lead, Major Yam Willock, crackled over the comm on the command deck. We are approaching the vicinity, engaged in locking down the source, sir. A heavy static resonated within the words. Not entirely to blame on the magnetic pulses generated from the twin ion engines, Side knew, and a few more seconds passed before they were on the target, as represented by their likeness within Side's hollow image. Sir, Cobras 2 and 3 provide triangulation of my vector. I have visual. Will attempt to gather. The crackling voice said, almost incomprehensible. Side knew the Major well and was waiting for his orders. Proceed, Major. Static comm apprise. The command deck could hear the familiar sounds of ion engines being powered down. Attainment, Captain. Metal cylinder. Heavy carbon scoring. Approximate 1 by 1. Bring it home? Major Willock was as straightforward over the comm to the command deck as if he would have been standing at their sides. Something within Side pulled dread over his vision, and his insides felt like they were being pulled from him. Negative, Major, get out of there. He barked into the comm on his end, the rest of the command crew staring in bewilderment. Cobra 2, Cobra 3, follow 1, get out of there now. Sir, was all anyone heard from before full static erupted through his deck. Side watched his hollow as the 3 dots vanished from view. What the hell just happened? Pridkar asked, his arms held open in surprise. Sir, Bev interjected, there are now 6 additional signals. Side watched as they appeared within the image, nowhere near the incident with the Major, he thought. Advise all channels. Stay clear of signal source, he said. Proximity explosive, Captain, set to detonate the moment its signal was compromised. 7 interjected after the conference with the Bruchal and their resultant, if not unharried, attempt at preliminary investigation. We believe the Major's tie was the trigger. This complicates things, Side confessed. Woohoo! An exhilarated cheer came from one of the junior techs further down the comm station at Bev's team. Tag, care to share? Side said, staring at the young man. Apologies, sir. I just got this over broadband. The Imperial Navy is closing in on the rebel base. He checked his settings quickly. At Yavin, Tarkin is commanding DS-1. Side could not help but stretch a wide grin across his face. This was good news indeed. Bev, signal that to the fleet. With the hyper relay offline, they won't get that feed. With pleasure, sir, she replied quickly. He could not fathom the depths to which his Emperor was engaged. how many fronts this man was capable of waging war. He shook his head with disbelief. Perhaps whatever this promises to be could be worthy of Tarkin's inevitable privilege, he thought. If his crew knew the scope of their Emperor's ambition, many victories would be forthcoming for the Silent Fleet. They were at the threshold to the penultimate objective when operations themselves would be insignificant and pale compared to what one Star Destroyer would be capable of. He was ready for their first order, but first, and for whatever reason his Emperor deemed fit, they needed to apprehend fugitive Tano. Flashes of red lightning, exposing black peaks of stone and lava-carved formations, hidden from view by thick smoky haze that was ever present, provided the background for the massive vessel residing just inside their view. Bolts of electricity fired in erratic directions from under the Star Destroyer's hull, a stark contrast of color to the red and black that comprised most of the planet, as the two sources of heat fought for supremacy. Its repulsors hummed to engage at full power as the behemoth sidled ever closer to the encroaching land below it, winning the war over the static discharge beneath it. What passed for clouds on Mustafar spilled over its edges and engulfed the ship, making it its own. Kawani watched with awe, disbelief, horror, and wonder. How something so magnificent could elicit two completely different responses within her was almost dumbfounding. Never seen a Star Destroyer before? Ahsoka asked, knowing full well she had. Kawani did not take her eyes off the descending vessel. Not like this. I might call this beautiful in another time and place, she responded. Ahsoka looked up again and shrugged. I've had my fill, thank you. Turning to the duffel at Kawani's side, she continued, That helmet in there? Kawani, eyes still skyward, fumbled for the bag's opening momentarily before turning her gaze downward. She parted the sides and grabbed the helmet and the data cylinder she had pulled from the terminal. Here, she said, passing the helmet to Ahsoka and simultaneously jamming the cylinder into the pocket with her data pad. She heard Ahsoka release a light cough and saw her friend with her hands on her hips. She had a disappointed look on her face and then looked down at the helmet. I apologize, she said, feeling the flush of embarrassment cascade over her. You'll have to show me how to work it, though, she said, recovering her pride and sliding the helmet over her own head, engaging the switch Ahsoka had shown her earlier. Hearing a slight hiss this time and a high-pitched whistle she hadn't noticed earlier, all she had seen prior was unchanged yet remarkably clearer. She could see small flashing lights at the vessel's side and a blast door opening to reveal a blue static field of a maglock. Ahsoka reached up a hand to tilt the rangefinder into Kawani's view and tapped at its pivot point a few times. How about now? Ahsoka said. Although the view through the helmet visor hadn't changed, the focus lens from the extended rangefinder was discombobulatingly much closer to the view of the maglock, and she could see and identify the transport ship decanting from the hangar bay. Inbound transport vessel, Kawani said with a focusing lens, continued following the transport, providing her with the distance, windage trajectories, and a firing solution. A full set of this armor would be incredible. Yeah, you need to meet Sabine, Ahsoka replied. Enough, Ahsoka, it's time to come home. The voice was there again, accented female. If she didn't know better, she would have assumed it was Kawani's. What did you say? She asked to be sure. A full set of this, Kawani started. No, after that. Kawani lifted the helmet from her head amidst a cadence of warning sounds from inside it. Nothing, she replied, looking at Ahsoka. I thought not. Ahsoka paused momentarily, hoping for the opposite. Ani, we're not done here. You hearing voices again? Kawani asked without hesitation. I am always hearing voices, she said with a measure of witticism. I usually just ignore them, though. Kawani wasn't sure if she should laugh along with her friend or adopt a profoundly concerned expression. She found another option. What do you mean, then, that we're not done here? She asked, watching Ahsoka switch her gaze from herself toward the direction the Mirai had left them. Kawani's gaze following Ahsoka's. She felt her stomach lurch and knew where this was going. Ahsoka, why? She said with all sincerity. Ahsoka knew the answer but remained silent. 1,000 thoughts descended upon her simultaneously, confounding logic and skewering her senses. Absolution, she finally said after a long pause. Kawani removed the helmet altogether and stood at Ahsoka's side, adopting a sardonic expression. Ahsoka, truly, to remain here is suicidal. This is looking more and more like a trap. We must find a vessel or a vector R3 can navigate to get us off this rock. And you want to venture right into the Rancor's den? Ahsoka again remained silent. You're the one who insisted on coming with. The retort was fresh and ready for use, but Ahsoka bit her tongue. They want you, have wanted you for some time. I've intercepted and seen the transmissions for over a year, and going there will give them exactly that. Me? What do you think they'll do with me? You were insistent upon following her, Ani, Tsar said. What happens to you also happens to me, but let's not forget that detail. I would not have agreed with the decision, but it has been made. Do you not think she already knows this? Kawani turned herself in a full 360 and exaggeratedly tossed her hands into the air, growling audibly. Ani, I have seen her mind, experienced her thoughts and past. Briefly, yes, but it is all I needed. She has fought for her sanity through conflict and war for almost 30 years. Although time has little meaning for me, let me make the comparison for you. That is, it is longer than you've been alive, my friend. She has little sense of herself through all of that because she has had little time to focus on what that means. I digress, though. As I said, you have already decided to move forward. Do not muddy the situation any further, please, he finished. Kawani, although initially defiant after listening intently to Tsar, began to understand. She looked at Ahsoka, who had hung her head and summarily sunk her body along the rock at her back to sit on the hard ground, pulling her knees into her chest. Ahsoka, she began. I'm just so tired, Ani. I am tired of fighting. I am tired of, well, life, Ahsoka said, surprising Kawani. I am tired of voices in my head that aren't my own. I am tired of obscure visions and mysteries. I am just tired. Kawani let her speak, saying nothing and remaining aware of Zar's words. Why did they all die? Huh? Why? And those that didn't, where are they? Ahsoka was screaming into the callous and perfunctory Mustafarian air. She reached up to gently rub the area around her broken mantra, squeezing her eyes shut and wincing from the pain. Kawani sat with a wince of her own at Ahsoka's side and wrapped an arm around the Togruta, pulling her close to her shoulder and placed a hand on Ahsoka's cheek to invite her friend into the crook formed between the shoulder and upper chest and held her there. Feeling Ahsoka's body begin to rack mildly, she felt Ahsoka's arms wrap around her as well, pulling them even closer together as the racking turned to sobbing. Kawani felt tears trail down her cheek as the total weight of what Zar had said finally hit home. She's been doing this alone for decades, Kawani thought. Precisely, Zar replied. There has always been assistants or associates of some sort, but never closeness. That was reserved for two people I could perceive, and no one since. Kawani struggled to understand the full complexities of Ahsoka's life, but understood enough from their time together to grasp what Zar was saying. I can never possibly know what you've been through, Ahsoka, but I will say this. You're not alone. Not now, not ever, as far as I'm concerned. Your past is where it belongs, and we are here now. She blew out her breath and squeezed Ahsoka's shoulder. What do we need to do? Ahsoka did not want to answer. Although she knew how, she just wanted to remain in the care of someone else for a few more moments. Feel the warmth of the embrace compassion bore. She tried to forget Mustafar, take the data cylinder and pitch it into the lava flows, cleave her sabers in half and leave them at Anakin's feet. She wanted to forget how one man could have orchestrated the fate of an entire galaxy, how that one man, through ambition and determination, settled scores, crossed barriers unknown, and brought a sense of stability to quadrillions of beings across the galaxy. Stability through deceit, lies and manipulation, corruption and decadence, war and death. Ahsoka began to feel ashamed of herself, how her plight paled, indeed, in comparison to vast cultures and ethnicities that had been exterminated for the most horrific reasons imaginable. How her actions themselves paled in comparison to entire planetary systems, coordinating efforts to drive the Empire away, only to be dealt a delayed death through retribution further down the road. She shut her eyes as she let go of her pride and again confided in the warmth of Kawani's embrace, thankful for it but thinking of all those who could not receive the same. A shrill, high-pitched whine of forced air broke them both from the confines of the embrace. 7-4-U, Kawani said with her eyes closed, wincing briefly as she got to her feet, grabbing the helmet. Not bad, Ahsoka replied, impressed with the appraisal. Nope, Z. She corrected herself. 2 of them. Kawani finished reactivating the helm and immediately locating the incoming scouts she ascertained. Headed our way, but not Vector. About 20 clicks out, Kawani smiled inwardly. Those are our rides, aren't they? She said, just now realizing she was speaking into a microphone built into the helmet and wondered what it sounded like to Ahsoka. They sure are, Ani, Ahsoka said with a wink. Kawani looked more closely at the riders. Ahsoka, these aren't troopers, she stated. They're fully armored with black and gray mottled camouflage and thin red lines. She finished, raising the rangefinder back into its rest state. Ahsoka pondered. That's either new or something else entirely, she said thoughtfully. I didn't think much of it, but the pattern is similar to the hull plating of the Star Destroyer, Kawani said, removing the helmet. I don't think this is Imp Navy. Something else, Ahsoka said to herself. May the Force guide us, Ani, she said, strolling from the confines of the rock wall and onto open ground. Stay down, she said. Kawani watched as Ahsoka casually brought both hands down to her hips, retrieving both hilts. Do you want this one? Kawani said, holding Ahsoka's Shoto blade in her open palm. Ahsoka considered it, but only for a moment. No, she said with more authority than she had intended. Kawani feeling her presence shift to the more formidable version she had witnessed on Narshada. Kawani felt the unease that conflicting thoughts and feelings always brought with them. She was pretty sure the doomed troopers headed their way and knew what was coming to them, but a sense of horror also gripped her, and she wasn't sure if the method of their inevitable demise was warranted. Ahsoka? I'll make it quick, Ani. I'm not here to make a statement, Ahsoka said. The comment came as both a relief and an inexplicable sense of excitement. She wasn't sure if she should have been horrified by her reaction or at peace with the normalcy at which these events defined her reality. The whine was building into a crescendo as the bikes approached. She didn't need the helmet to see how the ash was lodging, clogging the intake manifolds or caking on the exhaust vents by the way the contrails angled behind them. Amateurs, she thought. Ahsoka waited until the sides of the bikes breached her view before pulling both hilts and igniting them simultaneously in one quick movement, providing the riders with a flash of color to home in on. They both arced gracefully toward her. Kawani could hear the engines throttling down as they began to slow. Odd, she thought, and pulled the helmet back on. The visor immediately shaded red in her peripheral and auto-located another source of the contrail. Ahsoka, TX-225, same markings at your 9. She cursed inwardly for not being diligent with the transport ship's flight path details. Got it, Ahsoka replied as the upper port cannon fired from the approaching tank, sailing far overhead. The peripheral of the helmet visor flashed red again. Kawani could not see anything beyond what was before them. The tracking sensor within the visor that had flagged down the tank moments before was dancing at the brim of her vision. She cast her head back as the sensor target followed and danced again at the brim. Kawani turned her body around entirely, and the sensor locked on another pair of incoming bikes from behind them. She slipped the helmet up and found she was staring at the rock wall of the passageway. Sister, multiple targets, everywhere, she said, slipping the helmet back down, yet again rewarded with another red flash directly above her. Tie on repulsors above us, she said, becoming exasperated with all the unwanted attention. How did I not hear that tie, she asked herself. I can't sit here, Tsar, I need to act. I agree, we can get atop this rock formation, Tsar said. With this knee, possibly. Getting down would be the hard part, Kawani responded. On my terms, she added hastily. I take your meaning, but your knee should be much better by now. Try it. Kawani motioned to stand and found the pain had subsided considerably. Although pain remained, it was manageable. Slowly then, to the left, Tsar advised. Kawani moved with care behind and around the larger rocks at the base of the flat outcropping, the helmet visor switching to a mode she couldn't identify as it snapped yellow arcs across her field of view, before settling on a linear path that turned green. Ask and you shall receive, she thought. Indeed, said Zar. Ahsoka, give me some distraction, Kawani said, not taking her eyes off the digital line in her purview. She didn't get a chance to see Ahsoka shaking her head before she heard a fevered rhythmic humming and associated discharge as Ahsoka crossed the blades over her head. Kawani nodded in approval at the timeliness of the electronic blinding flashes of energy bathing their surroundings. That'll probably blind their sensors too, she thought as she found her egress and slid between two large rocks amid the top of the formation. Fumbling through the bag she had laid beside her for the components of the modified A-180 she loved to grab. She could lay prone and assess her targets as she assembled the blaster rifle with practiced hands. A lone tie above her, a model she was unfamiliar with, as was the helmet. Two more bikes, a quarter kilometers out in front of her now. Her thought process was piecing together all that was tactically known of their time here. If they intended to kill us, the tie would be the most direct threat, therefore, she thought, and summarily lined up a trooper in her sights. I concur, Tsar said. Thanks, Kawani thought as she pulled the trigger. With almost no report, the green energy bolt ripped through the trooper's chest and his back. The helmet lined up her next shot as it synced to the weapon in her hands. She pulled the trigger without a second thought as the reticle solidified and a slight tone in her ears flatlined. She didn't even have a chance to see what happened to his compatriot before he suffered the same fate. Kawani could hear the wavering hum of the sabers below and could only guess what was resultant after she had initiated the attack. She rolled over on her back and aimed for the tie above that was powering up its ion engines for what she guessed was a tactical redeployment. The reticle this time split in two. She would need to hit it twice to disable it. Hell with that, she said, toggling the discharge setting to full. Now we're talking, Zar said with a measure of enthusiasm she hadn't heard before. She had a shot lined up and patiently waited with measured breaths as the weapon audibly charged itself in her hands. A click and ping rang true in her helmet, and she pulled the trigger with a deafening report and a bright white flash from the suppressor as it released its cooling agent immediately around the barrel. The brilliant green energy bolt crashed through the underside of the TIE cockpit. It erupted through the entirety of the fighter, causing a magnificent deluge of debris, of brief arcs of electricity firing in all directions. The thunderous explosion incinerating the vessel in a mass of destruction, worthy of shipboard turbo laser cannons. She turned over immediately, curling herself into a ball to avoid being struck by falling debris as cascading shards of sheared and torn metal rained down from above. She opened her eyes to the stillness of post-catastrophic reaction and slid back down the way she had come without giving the carnage a second thought. Regaining her feet and dusting off her bottom as she reached level ground, she looked up to see Ahsoka glaring at her, the remaining three targets in her view with small yellow reticles snapped around their respective frames. Don't even look at me like that, Kawani said, locking the butt of the blaster rifle against her hip. There's a reason you liberated Kino first. Ahsoka pursed her lips to say something, but thought better of it and shrugged it off, deciding to leave debate out of the equation. That about sums it up. Let's grab the bikes if we're headed for the fortress. The tank is too slow and won't be able to keep up, Kawani said. Heading toward the original duo of speeders and accompanying troopers, she raised the A-180 again as she walked toward them. Both troopers spread their hands over their heads and stepped off and away from the idling Z-47s. She did have to admire the armor, she thought to herself. It was aesthetically pleasing for sure. It gave them a sense of professionalism and almost demanded intimidation. She could hear Ahsoka following behind her, and she was close enough to the troopers to make the approaching tank an afterthought. That was unprovoked terrorist action, began one of the troopers. Kawani finished her statement for her as she bore a hole through her chest with a discharge of the A-180. Anything else to add? Kawani asked the remaining trooper, who didn't utter a word with the muzzle pointed at him. He just shook his head and slowly stepped back away from the bike. Keep the nose up, flashed the forward vent sporadically. Set repulsor to max and open the rear gates fully, she said as she hopped on one of the bikes. Heard Ahsoka jump on the other, and with the muzzle unmoving from the trooper's chest, she said, We'll avoid repeating what these Chuba drugs did with these marvelous pieces of engineering. She lowered her gaze and slapped the controls to modify her bike the same way. In that split second, she heard a series of clicks, the swirling ignition of a lightsaber, and the most peculiar sound she had ever listened to a lightsaber make as she looked up to see the trooper's hand wrapping around a small holdout blaster strapped to his thigh, and Ahsoka's red saber embedded in his chest. As quickly as she saw and heard, it deactivated and soared back to the Togruta's waiting hand. Terrorist, I think she said, Kawani remarked as her reticle changed from a static group of lines to flashing red around the tank in her view. Time to go. She kicked down the throttle and opened it up, Ahsoka right at her side, leaving the tank in the distance far behind them. Please consider a like and sub. It is YouTube's way of getting these to more people. I am less concerned with subs as I am with getting the story out there, and I need your help to do that. Thank you.